Welcome, I'm John, and today I'm going to tell you an exciting story. Homeless woman returns wallet containing $100,000, and millionaire is surprised and changes his life. The November wind off Lake Michigan cut through the streets of Chicago like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. It whistled between the glass towers of the downtown financial district, swirling trash and dead leaves into tiny tornadoes before abandoning them in doorways and alleys. Most people didn't notice. They were too busy rushing from heated cars to heated buildings, their designer coats and scarves more fashion statement than necessity. Emily Carter noticed everything about the cold. She sat huddled against the brick wall of a building on Wacker Drive, her body curled into itself beneath a sleeping bag that had once been blue but was now an indeterminate shade of gray-brown. The fabric reeked of mildew, of rain-soaked nights, and too many months without proper washing. She'd found it in a dumpster behind a sporting goods store last spring, and despite its smell, it was the only thing standing between her and hypothermia. Her hands, protruding from the frayed edges of her coat sleeves, were cracked and raw. The skin around her knuckles had split in several places, thin lines of red that stung whenever she moved her fingers. She tucked them under her arms, trying to preserve what little warmth her body could generate. Emily was 38 years old, though the streets had aged her in ways that made strangers guess 45, maybe 50. Her face, once soft and round with the gentle curves of youth, had hollowed, her cheekbones pressed against skin that had forgotten the luxury of moisturizer, of steam from a hot shower, of sleep in a bed that didn't require one eye open for safety. Her stomach growled, a deep, angry sound that echoed in the empty cavern of her abdomen. 2 days. It had been 2 days since her last meal, a half-eaten sandwich she'd found on a bench near Millennium Park. The bread had been soggy, the lettuce wilted, but she'd eaten it gratefully, picking around the single bite mark some stranger had left behind. She closed her eyes and let herself remember, just for a moment, what it felt like to be warm, to be full, to be seen. 5 years ago, Emily Carter had been someone. Not famous, not wealthy, but someone. She'd worked at Millie's Diner on the South Side, a greasy spoon that served the best hash browns in the neighborhood and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The pay was terrible, the hours long, but she'd had regulars who knew her name, who asked about her mother, who left her tips that actually helped. Her mother, Margaret Carter, the woman who had raised Emily alone after her father disappeared when she was 6. Margaret, who worked 2 jobs to keep them in their tiny apartment, who never missed a parent-teacher conference, who taught Emily that integrity wasn't negotiable. "We may be poor, Emmy," her mother used to say, stirring instant coffee in their cramped kitchen, "but we don't steal, not even when no one's watching, especially not then." The cancer diagnosis came on a Tuesday in March, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctor's words had tumbled out in medical jargon that Emily barely understood, but the prognosis was clear: 6 months, maybe 8, with aggressive treatment. Treatment that cost more than Emily made in 5 years. She'd sold everything. Her car first, then her furniture, piece by piece. She moved them both into a smaller apartment, then a studio, then a single room in a boarding house that smelled of cabbage and defeat. She worked double shifts, picked up extra hours wherever she could find them. She begged the hospital for payment plans, filled out endless forms for assistance programs that all seemed to require documentation she didn't have. Her mother lasted 7 months, long enough to deplete every penny Emily had, long enough to leave Emily so exhausted, so emotionally shattered, that she missed 3 shifts at the diner. Long enough that when Margaret finally closed her eyes for the last time, Emily felt both devastating grief and terrible, guilty relief. The eviction notice came 2 weeks after the funeral. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of shelters when she could get a bed, of doorways and underpasses when she couldn't. 3 years of learning to make herself small, invisible, unthreatening. 3 years of watching people's eyes slide past her as if she were just another piece of urban furniture, as permanent and unremarkable as a fire hydrant. She never begged. Her mother's voice wouldn't let her. Instead, she collected cans and bottles, returned them for the nickel deposits. She picked through trash bins behind restaurants, looking for anything salvageable. Sometimes, very rarely, someone would offer her a day's work, moving boxes, cleaning out a basement, raking leaves. Those were good days. Days when she could eat and maybe, if she was lucky, afford a night in a shelter with a real shower. But those days were few and far between. Emily opened her eyes as a gust of wind sent a Starbucks cup skittering across the sidewalk. The morning rush was in full swing now. Lawyers and executives, analysts and administrators, all moving with purpose toward their important meetings and their important lives. Not one of them looked at her. She pushed herself to her feet, joints protesting, and shuffled toward the alley behind Pietro's, an upscale Italian restaurant that threw out more food in a day than Emily ate in a week. The dumpsters there were usually picked over by the time she arrived, but sometimes she got lucky. Today, she would get luckier than she could possibly imagine, though whether that luck would be a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. The alley behind Pietro's was narrow and shadowed, even in mid-morning. The restaurant's kitchen exhaust vents pumped out steam that smelled of garlic, tomatoes, and expensive wine reductions, scents that made Emily's empty stomach clench with longing. She approached the dumpsters carefully, always alert for rats or, worse, territorial homeless men who considered certain areas their exclusive hunting grounds. The first dumpster yielded nothing useful, mostly cardboard boxes broken down for recycling and industrial-sized cans that had already been emptied of their contents. The second was more promising. Someone had dumped a black trash bag on top of the pile, and it hadn't been tied properly. Emily could see something white poking out, possibly bread, or maybe napkins she could use. She dragged over a milk crate, climbed up, and reached in. Her fingers touched leather. Emily paused, confused. Leather didn't belong in restaurant trash. She pulled the object free, nearly losing her balance as it came loose more easily than expected. When she climbed down and examined her find in the weak morning light, her breath caught in her throat. A wallet. Not just any wallet, but the kind that screamed wealth. Soft Italian leather in deep burgundy, with subtle stitching and a designer logo she recognized from window displays in shops she'd never enter. It was pristine, unmarked by the coffee grounds and food scraps that surrounded it in the dumpster. Emily's hands trembled as she turned it over. Someone must have thrown it away by accident. Maybe in a rush, maybe drunk. She shouldn't open it. She should just turn it into the restaurant. But curiosity and hunger made her flip it open. The first thing she saw was the cash, crisp $100 bills, bound together with paper bands that read $10,000 in printed numbers. She counted the bands with shaking fingers. 10 of them. $100,000. More money than she'd earned in her entire working life. More money than she could conceptualize holding in her hands. Her vision blurred. Her knees felt weak. She steadied herself against the dumpster. The wallet clutched to her chest like a lifeline. With this money, she could rent an apartment, not just a room, but an actual apartment with a bathroom she didn't have to share with strangers. She could buy clothes that didn't come from donation bins. She could eat 3 meals a day for months, maybe a year if she was careful. She could get warm. She could sleep without fear. She could become visible again. No one had seen her find it. The alley was empty. She could walk away right now and no one would ever know. Emily's mother's voice whispered in her memory, especially not when no one's watching. "Shut up, Mom," Emily whispered back, immediately feeling guilty. She looked at the wallet again, forcing herself to examine the other contents. Credit cards, all black and heavy, the kind reserved for people who spent more on dinner than Emily used to make in a month. A gym membership card, a business card for a private medical practice in the Gold Coast neighborhood, and a driver's license. Emily angled it toward the light. The photo showed a man in his early 50s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that looked directly at the camera with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. His name was printed below, Michael James Donovan. The address was on Lakeshore Drive, one of the most expensive streets in Chicago. The name triggered a memory. She'd seen it before, on newspapers in recycling bins, on business sections left behind in coffee shops. Michael Donovan, CEO of Donovan Technologies, a company that did something with software and cloud computing that Emily didn't fully understand. But she understood that he was wealthy, powerful, the kind of man who probably didn't even notice when $100,000 went missing. Would he even care? Would a man like that, with his lakefront penthouse and his private doctors, even realize this wallet was gone? He could probably cancel the cards with a phone call and write off the cash as a rounding error. But it wasn't hers. It wasn't hers. And taking it would make her a thief. Emily sat down on the milk crate, the wallet heavy in her lap. Around her, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Delivery trucks rumbled past the alley entrance. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone laughed on the street behind her, the sound sharp and foreign. She thought about her mother in those final weeks, her body wasting away despite every dollar Emily had poured into treatment. Margaret had never complained, never blamed Emily for not having enough money, enough resources, enough power to save her. Even at the end, delirious with pain, she'd squeezed Emily's hand and whispered, "You're good, Emmy. You're so good." Was she? Was she good? The streets had a way of grinding goodness down, of making survival the only morality that mattered. 3 years of being invisible, of being less than human in the eyes of everyone who passed her, had left scars deeper than the ones on her hands. But somewhere underneath the hunger and the cold and the exhaustion, Emily Carter was still her mother's daughter. She zipped the wallet carefully into the inside pocket of her coat, the one she'd sewn a zipper into specifically for keeping precious things safe. Then she stood up, brushed off her pants, and started walking toward downtown, toward the gleaming tower with MICHAEL Donovan's name on it. Her stomach growled in protest, but Emily ignored it. She had a wallet to return. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that this single decision, made in a garbage-strewn alley on a freezing November morning, would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone she was about to meet. Sometimes the smallest acts of integrity cast the longest shadows. Donovan Tower rose 40 stories into the Chicago sky, its glass and steel facade reflecting clouds and neighboring buildings in a dizzying mosaic of corporate power. Emily stood on the sidewalk across the street, staring up at it with a mixture of determination and dread. The building seemed to mock her, pristine, untouchable, a world away from the alleys and doorways that had become her territory. She'd walked 12 blocks to get here, and her feet ached in shoes held together with duct tape. The wallet in her coat felt like it weighed 100 pounds, pressing against her ribs with every step. Twice, she'd almost turned back. Twice, she'd forced herself to keep going. The morning rush had peaked, but well-dressed professionals still flowed in and out of the building's revolving doors, like blood cells through an artery. Emily watched them, cataloging their confidence, their belonging. The men in their tailored suits and Italian leather shoes, the women in their pencil skirts and heels that clicked authoritatively against marble. They all had somewhere to be, someone waiting for them, work that mattered. She looked down at herself. Her coat was stained and threadbare, missing 2 buttons. Her jeans, donated from a shelter 3 months ago, hung loose on her shrinking frame and were torn at one knee. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen herself in a mirror, but she could imagine what she looked like, what she smelled like. A woman in a camel hair coat emerged from the building, talking rapidly into a phone. She nearly collided with Emily, then recoiled, her face twisting in disgust. "Watch it," she snapped, sidestepping as if Emily carried a contagious disease. Emily felt her resolve wavering. Maybe she could just leave the wallet with security. Surely they had a lost and found. She didn't need to see MICHAEL Donovan in person. She didn't need to subject herself to the stares, the judgment, the inevitable questions about how someone like her had come to possess something so valuable. But something stubborn inside her, some remnant of the woman she used to be, pushed her forward. The revolving door was an obstacle she hadn't anticipated. It had been so long since she'd used one that she mistimed her entry, nearly getting caught as the glass partition swung around. A security guard by the entrance looked up, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio. The lobby was vast and intimidating. Marble floors stretched toward a bank of elevators, their brass doors gleaming. A modern art installation, twisted metal that probably cost more than Emily's mother's entire medical bills, hung from the ceiling. The air was warm, almost suffocatingly so after the cold outside, and carried the faint scent of expensive cologne and fresh flowers. The reception desk sat like an altar at the center of the space, behind which sat a woman in her 30s with glossy dark hair pulled into a tight bun. Her makeup was flawless, her navy suit crisp. A gold nameplate read Jennifer Moss. She was typing something on her computer, her manicured nails clicking against the keys with practiced precision. Emily approached slowly, aware of the security guard tracking her movements from the corner of her eye. Other people in the lobby had stopped their conversations, sensing something out of place. She felt their eyes on her back like physical weight. "Excuse me," Emily said, her voice coming out smaller than she'd intended. Jennifer looked up, and Emily watched her expression shift from professional courtesy to barely concealed alarm. The receptionist's eyes traveled from Emily's unwashed hair to her dirty coat to her broken shoes, cataloging and dismissing her in the span of 2 seconds. "The shelters are several blocks north," Jennifer said coolly, her hand drifting toward the phone. "You'll need to—" "I'm here to return something," Emily interrupted, pulling the wallet from her coat. "It belongs to Michael Donovan. I found it, and I want to give it back." Jennifer stared at the wallet as if Emily had pulled out a live snake. "You found that?" It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "Yes, this morning, near Wacker Drive." Emily held it out, but Jennifer didn't take it. "I just want to return it, that's all. How do I know you didn't steal it?" The words hit Emily like a slap. Of course that would be the assumption. People like her didn't find valuable things and return them. People like her took, stole, scavenged. That was the narrative society had written for her the moment she lost her home. "I didn't steal it," Emily said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I found it in the trash behind Pietro's restaurant. Everything's inside, cash, cards, everything. I didn't take anything. I just want to give it back to Mr. Donovan." Jennifer's hand was definitely on the phone now. "And I'm going to need to call security." "Call whoever you need to call," Emily said, placing the wallet on the desk's polished surface. "But please, just get it to him. Tell him Emily Carter found it. Tell him I didn't want a reward. I just wanted to do the right thing." She turned to leave, exhaustion and humiliation washing over her. She'd done what she came to do. The wallet would find its way back to its owner, and she could return to her invisible existence with her dignity intact. "Wait," the voice came from behind her, deeper than Jennifer's, male and authoritative. Emily turned to find a man in a navy suit striding toward her from the elevators. He was in his early 40s, with dark hair graying at the temples and sharp, assessing eyes. A Bluetooth earpiece blinked in his ear. "I'm Jordan Hayes, Mr. Donovan's executive assistant," he said, his gaze moving between Emily and the wallet on the desk. "You're saying you found Mr. Donovan's wallet?" Emily nodded, too tired to explain again. Jordan picked up the wallet, opened it, and his eyebrows rose. He looked at Emily with new interest, not warmth exactly, but something less hostile than Jennifer's open suspicion. "Come with me," he said. "Mr. Donovan will want to thank you personally." The elevator ride to the 35th floor was the longest 90 seconds of Emily's life. She stood in the corner, trying to make herself smaller, while Jordan Hayes occupied the center of the car with the casual authority of someone who belonged. He typed something on his phone, his thumbs moving with practiced speed, occasionally glancing at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, curiosity mixed with something that might have been pity. Emily caught her reflection in the polished brass of the elevator panel and immediately looked away. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow and ringed with shadows. A smudge of dirt marked her left cheek. She tried to wipe it away with her sleeve, but only succeeded in smearing it. "Mr. Donovan's schedule is packed today," Jordan said, without looking up from his phone. "He has a board meeting in 40 minutes, so this will need to be brief." Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. Her heart hammered against her ribs, partly from anxiety, partly from the simple fact that she was rising higher into the sky than she'd been in 3 years. The elevator was warm, too warm after the cold outside, and she felt dizzy. The doors opened onto a reception area that looked like something from a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, gray and choppy under the November sky. Modern furniture in shades of cream and charcoal arranged themselves in conversation clusters. Abstract paintings that probably cost more than houses hung on the walls. A woman sat at a sleek desk, another gatekeeper, Emily realized, though this one wore a friendly smile that seemed more genuine than Jennifer's downstairs. She was younger, maybe 25, with red hair pulled into a professional ponytail. "Jordan," she said warmly, then noticed Emily and blinked. "Oh, Sarah, this is Emily Carter. She found Mr. Donovan's wallet. Is he available?" Sarah's eyes widened. "The wallet he lost last night. With the—" She stopped herself, glancing at Emily. "He's been looking everywhere for that. Let me buzz him." She picked up her phone and spoke quietly into it. Emily heard her own name mentioned, then the word, "wallet," followed by a pause. Sarah's eyebrows rose. "Yes, sir, right away." She hung up and gestured toward a set of double doors made of frosted glass. "He'll see you now." Jordan opened the doors and motioned Emily through. She hesitated at the threshold, suddenly terrified. What was she doing here? This wasn't her world. These people, With their expensive clothes and their important jobs and their assumptions about who belonged and who didn't, they would see right through her. They would know she was nothing, but she'd come this far. Emily stepped into Michael Donovan's office. The space was enormous, larger than the entire apartment she'd shared with her mother. Windows wrapped around 2 walls, filling the room with cold November light. A glass desk dominated the center, its surface nearly empty except for a sleek computer monitor and a single framed photograph Emily couldn't see clearly from where she stood. Modern art hung on the interior walls, bold slashes of color that probably had deep meaning she couldn't access. And there, standing by the window with his back to them, was Michael Donovan himself. He was tall, over 6 feet, with silver hair that caught the light. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, the kind of tailoring that spoke of personal attention and unlimited budgets. His hands were clasped behind his back as he stared out at the lake, and there was something in his posture, attention, perhaps, or weariness, that made him seem almost human. "Mr. Donovan," Jordan said, "this is Emily Carter." Michael turned, and Emily found herself looking into the same sharp blue eyes she'd seen on the driver's license. In person, they were even more striking, intelligent, assessing, but not unkind. He studied her for a long moment, and Emily forced herself not to look away, not to apologize for her existence. "You found my wallet," he said. His voice was deep, with the measured tones of someone accustomed to being listened to. Emily nodded. "Yes, sir." This morning, behind Pietro's restaurant on Wacker Drive, Jordan stepped forward and handed Michael the wallet. Emily watched as he opened it, his fingers moving through the contents with practiced efficiency. The cash, the credit cards, the license, everything exactly as Emily had found it. Michael looked up, his expression shifting from neutral assessment to something like disbelief. "You didn't take anything?" It wasn't a question, but Emily answered anyway. "No, sir, not a single dollar." "No." He studied her again, really looked at her this time. Emily felt his gaze taking in her unwashed hair, her hollow cheeks, her cracked hands, the coat that barely kept out the cold. She saw the exact moment when he understood what returning the wallet had cost her, what it meant for someone in her situation to walk past that much money. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. "When did you last eat?" Michael asked quietly. The question caught Emily off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, unsure how to answer without sounding like she was begging. "I'm fine," she said finally. "That's not what I asked." Emily's eyes stung with sudden, unexpected tears. When was the last time someone had asked her a direct question about her welfare? When was the last time anyone had cared enough to look past her circumstances to see her? 2 days, she whispered. Maybe 3. I lose track sometimes. Michael's jaw tightened. He looked at Jordan. "Cancel my morning meetings." "Sir, the board." "Will wait." Michael's tone left no room for argument. He turned back to Emily, and his expression had shifted again, the businessman giving way to something softer, more human. "Ms. Carter, would you sit with me for a while? I'd like to hear your story, and I'd like you to eat something while we talk." Emily's legs trembled. She'd expected a thank you, maybe a handshake, possibly some reward she would have politely refused. She hadn't expected this attention, this interest, this simple human kindness. "I don't want to take up your time," she managed. "You're not taking anything," Michael said, gesturing toward a seating area by the window, leather chairs arranged around a low table. "You're giving me something I seem to have lost. Please, sit." So Emily, who hadn't sat on furniture that didn't belong to a shelter in 3 years, lowered herself carefully into a chair that probably cost more than she used to make in 6 months. And for the first time since her mother died, someone actually listened to her story. Jordan left and returned minutes later with a tray that made Emily's stomach clench with longing. Fresh fruit, strawberries, grapes, sliced melon, croissants that flaked at the touch, still warm from wherever they'd been procured, a sandwich on thick artisan bread with layers of turkey, cheese, and vegetables she could see through the clear wrapping, a bottle of orange juice, beaded with condensation, a cup of coffee that sent steam curling into the air. "Please," Michael said, gesturing toward the food. "Eat." Emily stared at the tray, paralyzed. Her mother had taught her manners. You didn't grab, didn't shove food into your mouth like an animal, didn't take more than your share. But her body didn't care about manners. Her hands trembled as she reached for the sandwich, unwrapping it with fingers that barely cooperated. The first bite was almost painful. Her shrunken stomach protested the sudden influx of substance, but she couldn't stop. The bread was soft, the turkey tender, the cheese sharp and perfect. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but hunger overrode pride. Michael watched her without comment, without judgment, sipping his own coffee. He'd pulled his chair closer, his posture relaxed, patient. When Emily finally slowed down, having eaten half the sandwich and a handful of grapes, he spoke. "Tell me about yourself, Emily." She wiped her mouth with the cloth napkin Jordan had provided, actual cloth, not paper, and felt the weight of the question. Where did she even begin? How did you summarize the collapse of a life in a way that made sense to someone who lived in a world like this? "I wasn't always," she gestured vaguely at herself, "like this." "I didn't assume you were," Michael said quietly. So Emily told him about her mother, about the diner, about the cancer diagnosis that arrived like a tornado and destroyed everything in its path. She told him about selling her possessions one by one, watching her life dismantle itself piece by piece. She told him about the hospital bills that kept coming even after her mother died, about the eviction, about the first night she spent in a shelter and realized she had nowhere else to go. She told him about the shame of it, not the poverty itself, but the invisibility, the way people's eyes would slide past her on the street as if she were a ghost, the way store owners would watch her suspiciously if she dared to enter, the way her existence had been reduced to a problem to be managed, a nuisance to be ignored. "I worked," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I've always worked. I collected cans, did odd jobs when I could find them. I never begged. My mother," her voice caught, "my mother taught me that we don't take what isn't ours, even when no one's watching, especially then." Michael leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression intent. "That's why you brought the wallet back." "I thought about keeping it," Emily admitted, the confession coming easier than she'd expected. "God, I thought about it. $100,000. Do you know what that money could have meant to me? An apartment, heat, food, the chance to be human again." She laughed, a bitter sound, but I kept hearing her voice. "We may be poor, but we don't steal. So I brought it back, and you asked for nothing in return." "I don't want charity, Mr. Donovan." "Michael," he corrected, "and it wouldn't be charity. You did something remarkable, something that most people, even those who've never known hardship, wouldn't have done." He paused, studying her. "I've been wealthy for a long time, Emily. I've donated millions to causes I believe in. I've written checks to organizations that promise to help people like you. But I can't remember the last time I actually looked someone in your situation in the eyes and asked them what they needed." Emily felt something crack in her chest. "Why are you being kind to me?" The question seemed to surprise him. He sat back, considering it. Outside the windows, clouds moved across the sky, casting shadows over the lake. A plane tracked across the horizon, tiny and distant. "5 years ago," Michael said finally, "my daughter was in a car accident. Bad one. She was in a coma for 2 weeks." His voice remained steady, but Emily could hear the old pain underneath. "I sat by her bed every day, every night. I prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. I made promises, bargains. I would have given every dollar I had, burned this whole company to the ground, if it meant she'd wake up." "Did she?" Emily asked softly. "Yes, but during those 2 weeks, sitting in that hospital, I saw other families, families without insurance, without resources. I saw a mother crying in the hallway because she couldn't afford her son's treatment. I saw a father sleeping in a chair because he couldn't afford a hotel. And I realized something." He met Emily's eyes. "The money had insulated me from understanding what most people face. I'd built walls around myself, walls made of wealth and privilege, and I'd forgotten what it meant to be vulnerable." He gestured around the office, at the expensive art and the lake view and the symbols of his success. "I promised myself that if my daughter survived, I would do better, be better. Not just write checks, but actually engage with the world outside my bubble." He smiled sadly. "I started a foundation, hired good people to run it. But you know what? I still took meetings about quarterly earnings. I still spent more time worrying about stock prices than people. I still walked past homeless people on the street without really seeing them. Until today," Emily said. "Until today," he agreed. "You walked 12 blocks to return something that didn't belong to you. You chose integrity over survival. And in doing so, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" That the measure of a person isn't what they do when people are watching. It's what they do when no one is. Michael stood and walked to his desk, returning with a business card and a pen. He wrote something on the back and handed it to her. There's a shelter on North Avenue, St. Catherine's. It's run by a friend of mine, Father Tom Martinez. Show him this card. Tell him I sent you. They'll give you a bed, a hot shower, and 3 meals a day for as long as you need. Emily took the card with shaking hands. Mr. Donovan, Michael, I can't. You can, he said firmly. And you will. But that's not all. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. How do you feel about working? Emily's heart stuttered. Working? I have a position open in our mailroom. It's entry-level, sorting, delivering packages, that sort of thing. But it's honest work with honest pay. Healthcare benefits after 90 days, if you're interested. The room seemed to tilt. Emily gripped the arms of the chair, certain she'd misheard. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance. Michael corrected. What you do with it is up to you. Emily stood outside St. Catherine's shelter as the winter sun began its early descent, painting the Chicago sky in shades of amber and gray. The building was a converted church, its Gothic revival architecture softened by time and wear. Stained glass windows, some cracked and patched, still caught the light. A hand-painted sign above the entrance read, "All are welcome here." She clutched Michael Donovan's business card like a talisman, her thumb tracing the embossed letters of his name on the front, the handwritten note on the back. Tom, please help Ms. Carter. She's earned it. M.D. Emily had walked here in a daze, Michael's words still echoing in her mind. A job. A real job with benefits and a paycheck and the possibility of rebuilding something she'd thought was lost forever. It seemed too good to be true, which meant it probably was. People like her didn't get second chances. People like her got recycled promises and empty gestures. But here she was anyway, standing at the threshold between her old life and something she couldn't quite let herself imagine. The door opened before she could knock, and a man in his 60s appeared, short and stocky, with a weathered face that spoke of laughter and hardship in equal measure. He wore jeans, a flannel shirt, and a collar that identified him as clergy, his gray hair stuck up in wild tufts, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "You must be Emily," he said, his voice warm and gravelly. Michael called, "I'm Tom Martinez. Come in, come in. It's freezing out here." The interior of St. Catherine's was a controlled chaos of humanity. The main hall had been divided into sections. Sleeping areas with rows of cots separated by curtains for privacy. A dining area where people sat at long tables. A common space with mismatched furniture and a television mounted on the wall. The air smelled of industrial cleaner, coffee, and the particular scent of too many people living too close together. But it was warm, gloriously, beautifully warm. "We're at capacity tonight," Father Tom said, leading Emily through the space. People looked up as they passed, some curious, some indifferent, most recognizing a fellow traveler in Emily's worn appearance. "But we always keep a few beds reserved for emergencies. Michael said you'd be staying with us for a while, getting back on your feet." Emily nodded, still not trusting herself to speak. The kindness in Father Tom's eyes threatened to undo her completely. He showed her to a cot in the women's section, separated from the main hall by a portable partition. About 20 beds lined the space, most already claimed with personal belongings, backpacks, shopping bags, the collected detritus of transient lives. Emily's cot was near the back, next to a window that looked out onto an alley. "Dinner's at 6, Father Tom said, handing her a towel and a small toiletry kit. "Showers are down that hall. There's a sign-up sheet, but I'll make sure you get a slot tonight. We have some donated clothes in the storage room. One of our volunteers, Margaret, will help you find something that fits." He paused, studying her with eyes that had clearly seen countless variations of her story. "Michael told me what you did, returning that wallet. That took character, Emily, real character. The kind that's rare even in people who've never known hardship." Emily's throat tightened. "I just did what my mother taught me." "Your mother raised you right." Father Tom smiled. "Get yourself cleaned up. Have some dinner. Tomorrow, we'll talk about getting you to Donovan Tower for your first day." Michael's serious about that job. He doesn't make offers he doesn't intend to keep. After he left, Emily sat on the cot and let herself feel it. The relief, the fear, the cautious hope that felt almost painful in its fragility. Around her, the shelter hummed with life. A woman 2 beds over sang softly to herself in Spanish. Someone laughed near the entrance. A child's voice called out for their mother. These were her people now. The forgotten, the failed, the fallen. But maybe, just maybe, not forever. The shower was the closest thing to a religious experience Emily had known in years. St. Catherine's had ancient plumbing and water pressure that fluctuated wildly, but it was hot and it was clean and it was hers for 15 glorious minutes. Emily stood under the spray until her skin turned pink, watching 3 years of street grime swirl down the drain. She washed her hair 3 times with the donated shampoo, working through tangles that had become permanent knots. She scrubbed her body with soap that smelled like lavender, an almost forgotten luxury. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that had seen better days but was blessedly clean, she caught sight of herself in the foggy mirror. The face looking back was thinner than she remembered, older, marked by suffering. But the eyes, her mother's green eyes, still held something she'd thought was lost. Not hope exactly, but the memory of hope, the possibility of it. Margaret, the volunteer Father Tom had mentioned, was a plump woman in her 70s with kind eyes and efficient hands. She led Emily to the storage room and surveyed her with a practiced eye. "Size 6, she asked. "Used to be," Emily said. Maybe a 4 now." Margaret clucked her tongue sympathetically and began pulling items from neatly organized bins. She assembled an outfit with care: clean jeans that were only slightly worn, a thermal shirt, a sweater in dark green that brought out Emily's eyes, wool socks without holes, and a winter coat that was leagues better than the one Emily had been wearing. "For your job," Margaret said, smiling. "Father Tom told me. We're all so proud of you, dear." Emily, overwhelmed, could only nod. Dinner was beef stew with bread, simple but hot and filling. Emily sat at one of the long tables next to a woman who introduced herself as Rita, 40-something, with nervous hands and a story Emily recognized in the shadows under her eyes. They didn't talk much, but there was comfort in the shared silence, in the unspoken understanding. That night, lying on her cot with a full stomach and clean skin for the first time in recent memory, Emily pulled out the business card Michael had given her. There was another note on it she'd noticed only later, written in smaller script below his message to Father Tom. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing despite it. See you Monday, M.D. Monday, 3 days away." 3 days to prepare herself for stepping into a world she'd been exiled from. 3 days to figure out how to be someone other than invisible. Emily pressed the card to her chest and closed her eyes. Around her, the shelter settled into its nighttime rhythm. Snores and whispers, the occasional cry of someone lost in dreams. Outside, the city continued its indifferent pulse. But for the first time in 3 years, Emily Carter fell asleep believing that morning might bring something other than survival. It might bring the chance to live again. Monday morning arrived with crystalline winter sunlight that made the frost on St. Catherine's windows sparkle like diamonds. Emily woke at 5:30, an hour before the shelter's official wake-up time, her heart pounding with anxiety and anticipation. She'd barely slept, running through imaginary scenarios of her first day. What if she couldn't remember how to act in an office? What if people recognized her from the streets? What if Michael Donovan had changed his mind over the weekend and the job offer had been nothing more than a momentary impulse of charity? In the bathroom, she stared at her reflection under the harsh fluorescent lights. 3 days of regular meals had brought slight color back to her cheeks. Her hair, washed and brushed, fell in waves around her shoulders. Margaret's donated clothes fit reasonably well, the jeans only slightly loose, the green sweater clean and presentable. But Emily could still see the homelessness in her eyes, in the way she held herself, small, apologetic, prepared for rejection. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "A mom would want you to do this." Father Tom insisted on giving her subway fare and a brown bag lunch. "Just until your first paycheck," he said with a knowing smile that suggested he'd helped countless others through this same transition. Emily accepted both with trembling hands and gratitude that lodged in her throat like a stone. The morning commute was surreal. Emily stood on the Red Line train surrounded by professionals heading to their jobs, and for the first time in 3 years, she was one of them. Not homeless Emily, not invisible Emily, but Emily Carter reporting to work at Donovan Technologies. She gripped the pole and watched the tunnels blur past, feeling the train's rhythm sync with her racing pulse. When she emerged from the subway station near Donovan Tower, the building looked different than it had on Friday. Less intimidating, perhaps, or maybe she was simply less terrified. She took a deep breath of the cold November air and walked through the revolving doors. Jennifer at the reception desk did a visible double-take. "You're Emily Carter," Emily said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I'm starting in the mailroom today. Mr. Donovan arranged it." Jennifer's expression cycled through surprise, skepticism, and finally, professional courtesy. "Of course. I'll call up to let them know you're here." She picked up the phone, her tone noticeably cooler than it would have been for any other new employee. 10 minutes later, a woman in her 40s appeared from the elevator bank, stocky build, short gray hair, and sharp brown eyes that assessed Emily in a single glance. She wore cargo pants and a Donovan Technologies polo shirt, and carried herself with the no-nonsense air of someone who'd spent years in the trenches of corporate logistics. "Emily Carter?" Her voice was brisk but not unkind. "I'm Denise Washington, mailroom supervisor. Welcome to the team." Emily shook her hand, noting Denise's firm grip. "Thank you for having me. Mr. Donovan personally called to let me know you'd be joining us," Denise said as they walked toward the elevators. "That doesn't happen often. Actually, that's never happened in my 12 years here. So whatever you did to impress him, it must have been something special." Emily didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. The mailroom was in the basement, a sprawling space filled with sorting stations, rolling carts, shelves of packages, and the constant hum of activity. 3 other workers looked up as Denise led Emily inside, 2 young men who couldn't have been older than 25, and a woman about Emily's age with purple-streaked hair and multiple piercings. "Listen up, people," Denise announced. "This is Emily. She's starting today. Marcus, you're training her on package sorting. Be nice." Marcus, one of the young men, tall and lanky with an easy smile, gave Emily a friendly wave. "No problem, boss. Come on, Emily, let me show you the ropes." As Emily followed Marcus to a sorting station piled high with packages and envelopes, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to identify it. Purpose. For the first time in 3 years, Emily Carter had a purpose beyond simply surviving the day. She picked up her first package and got to work. 3 weeks passed in a blur of sorting packages, learning routes through Donovan Tower's 40 floors, and discovering the peculiar rhythms of corporate life. Emily arrived early every morning and stayed late, driven by equal parts gratitude and terror that someone would realize a mistake had been made and send her back to the streets. The work was physically demanding, hours on her feet, pushing heavy carts, climbing stairs when the freight elevator was occupied. But Emily welcomed the exhaustion. It was honest fatigue, earned through labor rather than survival. Each night she returned to St. Catherine's with aching muscles and a paycheck building toward her first bi-weekly deposit. Her co-workers had accepted her with varying degrees of warmth. Marcus treated her like a younger sister, patiently explaining the building's complicated delivery system and sharing his lunch when he noticed Emily's brown bag portions were meager. The woman with purple hair, whose name was Zoe, had a sharp wit and sharper observations. She'd sized Emily up on day 2. "You're running from something," Zoe said during their break, not unkindly. "Or running toward something." "Maybe both." Emily had frozen, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "What makes you say that? You work like someone who's afraid to stop. Like if you pause for even a second, something bad will catch up to you." Zoe shrugged. "I recognize it because I used to be the same way. After my divorce, after I lost custody of my kids, work was the only thing that made sense. It was the most personal thing anyone had shared with her since she'd started." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. "I was homeless," she admitted quietly. "Before this, Mr. Donovan gave me a second chance." Zoe's expression softened. "Then you're exactly where you need to be. And for what it's worth, you're doing a damn good job." The validation meant more than Emily could articulate. Not everyone was as accepting. Some of the higher floor employees looked through her when she delivered their packages, as if mailroom workers existed in some invisible servant class. Others were outright rude, snapping orders, complaining about delivery times, treating her like an inconvenience rather than a person. But Emily had spent 3 years being invisible. These small slights barely registered. She simply smiled, did her job, and moved on. What surprised her most was the quiet satisfaction she found in the work itself. There was a meditative quality to sorting mail, to organizing packages by floor and department, to ensuring everything reached its proper destination. Order from chaos, purpose from disorder. It felt symbolic somehow, like her own life being sorted and filed into place. She saw MICHAEL Donovan occasionally, glimpses as he moved through the lobby with his entourage, or caught his reflection in the elevator's brass doors as she pushed a loaded cart past. He always acknowledged her with a nod or a small smile, never drawing attention to their history, never making her feel like a charity case, until the day he appeared in the mailroom unannounced. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Emily was alone, reorganizing a shelf of misrouted packages. She didn't hear him enter over the radio Denise kept playing in her office. "Hello, Emily." She spun around, nearly dropping the box in her hands. Michael stood in the doorway in his customary suit, looking oddly out of place in the basement's utilitarian space. "Mr. Donovan," she stammered. "I didn't. Is something wrong?" "Not at all. I wanted to see how you were settling in." He walked further into the room, his eyes taking in the organized chaos with interest. "Denise tells me you're exceeding expectations." Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm just doing my job." "You're doing more than that." He paused beside her sorting station. "I also wanted to tell you something. My foundation, the one I mentioned, is expanding. We're creating a new program specifically focused on helping people transition out of homelessness, job training, housing assistance, mental health support, the whole spectrum." Emily's heart began to race. "That's wonderful." "I was hoping," Michael said, meeting her eyes, "that once you're more established here, you might consider joining the Foundation's advisory board. Your perspective, your experience, would be invaluable. We need voices like yours helping shape the program." Emily stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Me? On an advisory board? Why not you? You understand what people in that situation need because you've lived it." "That's worth more than any degree or credential." He smiled. "Think about it. There's no rush. But I wanted you to know that I see more in you than just a good mailroom employee. Emily, I see someone with the potential to help change lives." He left before she could respond, his words hanging in the air like a promise. Emily stood alone among the packages, her hands trembling, her eyes blurred with tears she didn't try to hide. For the first time since her mother died, she felt seen, not just noticed, but truly seen, valued for who she was and what she'd survived. It was the beginning of something she'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. 6 months transformed Emily Carter in ways that went deeper than surface appearances, though those changes were striking enough. Regular meals had filled out her gaunt frame. Her hair, now professionally cut courtesy of a salon voucher from St. Catherine's volunteer program, fell in healthy waves. The shadows under her eyes had faded, replaced by a brightness that came from sleeping in safety and waking with purpose. But the real transformation was internal, a gradual rebuilding of the person she'd been before the streets had stripped her down to survival instinct. She'd moved out of St. Catherine's 3 months earlier into a studio apartment in a modest neighborhood on the north side. It wasn't much, 400 square feet with a kitchenette and a bathroom that sometimes lost hot water, but it was hers. She had a door that locked from the inside, a bed that didn't require vigilance, windows with curtains she'd bought herself from a thrift store. The first night alone in that apartment, Emily had sat on the floor and cried for an hour. Tears of relief, of grief for the years lost, of gratitude so profound it felt like prayer. At Donovan Technologies, she'd been promoted twice, first to senior mailroom clerk, then to logistics coordinator, a position that came with a desk, a computer, and responsibilities that required her to interact with department heads across the company. Denise had recommended her personally, telling Michael that Emily had the kind of work ethic and integrity you can't teach. The advisory board position had materialized 2 months ago. Once a week, Emily sat in conference rooms with social workers, nonprofit directors, and formerly homeless individuals, helping design the Donovan Foundation's new Path Forward program. Her input was sought, valued, documented in meeting minutes with her name attached. Emily Carter was becoming someone again, but it wasn't without challenges. Some days, panic would grip her without warning, a visceral fear that this was all temporary, that she'd wake up on the streets with this entire experience revealed as an elaborate dream. She'd learned to breathe through these moments, to ground herself in physical reality, the solid desk beneath her hands, the hum of her computer, the ID badge clipped to her belt that bore her name and photo. Therapy helped. The foundation's mental health resources had connected her with Dr. Patricia Chen, a psychologist who specialized in trauma. Once a week, Emily sat in Dr. Chen's office and unpacked the weight she'd been carrying, the guilt over her mother's death, the shame of homelessness, the complex grief of losing not just a home but an identity. "You're mourning multiple losses," Dr. Chen had explained during one session. "Your mother, yes, but also the person you were before. That Emily died too, in a way. What you're doing now is introducing yourself to the Emily who survived, getting to know her, learning to trust her again." The words had unlocked something in Emily. She'd spent so long viewing her homelessness as a failure that she'd never considered it might also be a testament to her resilience. She had survived 3 years of circumstances that broke people. She had maintained her integrity when it would have been easier to abandon it. She had chosen kindness even when the world had shown her cruelty. That meant something. She meant something. Michael had become an unexpected mentor. They met monthly for coffee in his office. Conversations that ranged from foundation business to life philosophy, to their shared experience of loss. He told her more about his daughter, Rebecca, now 28 and working as a pediatric surgeon in Boston. The accident that had nearly killed her had inspired Rebecca to dedicate her life to saving others. "Trauma either destroys us or defines us," Michael had said during one of these meetings. "You've chosen to let it define you in the best possible way." Now, as Emily sat in the Foundation's conference room preparing for a major presentation, she felt the weight of that choice. Today, she would present the preliminary framework for Path Forward to a room full of potential donors and community partners. Her voice would shape the program. Her experience would guide its implementation. The woman who'd sat in a freezing alley 6 months ago, holding a wallet and contemplating theft, seemed like a stranger now. Yet Emily carried her always. A reminder of how quickly life could change, how fragile stability could be, how crucial second chances were. The conference room began to fill. Michael entered with his executive team, caught Emily's eye, and gave her an encouraging nod. Emily stood, smoothed her blazer, purchased new with her own money, and moved to the front of the room. She had a story to tell, and finally, people were ready to listen. 1 year after Emily Carter found a wallet that changed her life, she stood in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, surrounded by 300 people who'd gathered for the Donovan Foundation's annual gala. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables dressed in white linen. The city's philanthropic elite mingled with community leaders, nonprofit directors, and, most importantly, 12 individuals who'd graduated from the Path Forward program's first cohort. Emily wore a navy dress she'd bought specifically for tonight, simple but elegant. Her hair was styled, her hands steady as she held a glass of sparkling water. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined standing in a room like this. Now, she belonged here. The evening's program had included testimonials from Path Forward participants, men and women who'd found their way off the streets through job training, mental health support, and housing assistance. Each story was unique, yet Emily recognized herself in every one. The shame, the invisibility, the moment when someone finally saw them as human. Now it was her turn to speak. Michael approached as she stood near the stage, reviewing her notes one final time. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," Emily admitted with a small smile. "Public speaking wasn't part of mailroom training. You'll be wonderful. Just tell your truth." He paused, his expression softening. "I'm proud of you, Emily. Not just for tonight, but for everything you've become." Emily felt tears threaten, but blinked them back. "I couldn't have done it without you giving me that chance. I gave you a job. You did everything else." Michael gestured toward the room full of people. "You built this program from the ground up. You convinced our board to commit $5 million. You recruited partners, designed curriculum, advocated for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. That wasn't me. That was all you." Before Emily could respond, the Foundation's executive director took the stage and announced her name. Emily walked into the spotlight, her heart pounding but her steps certain. She looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, most strangers, and began. "A year ago, I was invisible," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And I sat on sidewalks in the city, and thousands of people walked past without seeing me. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't an addict. I wasn't looking for a handout. I was just a woman who'd lost everything trying to save her mother's life, and the world had decided I didn't matter anymore." She told them about the wallet, about the choice she'd made in that alley, about Michael's unexpected kindness and the opportunities that followed. "But here's what I learned," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. "Second chances don't erase the past. I still carry my years on the streets with me. I still have days when I wake up terrified that I'll lose everything again. But those experiences made me who I am. They taught me empathy, resilience, and the value of integrity when no one's watching." She gestured toward the Path Forward graduates seated at a front table. "These 12 people represent just the beginning. Each of them made the same choice I did, to keep fighting, to maintain their humanity even when society treated them as less than human. They deserve more than charity. They deserve opportunity, dignity, recognition that they are not defined by their worst moments, but by their capacity to overcome them." Emily's eyes found Michael in the crowd. He was smiling, his eyes bright with emotion. "A year ago, one man chose to see me when the world had decided I was invisible. He didn't just write a check, he offered respect, purpose, and the chance to rebuild. That's what Path Forward is about. Not rescuing people, but recognizing them. Not saving them, but empowering them to save themselves." The applause began before she finished, building into a standing ovation that filled the ballroom. Emily stood at the podium, overwhelmed, as 300 people rose to their feet. Later, as the gala wound down, Emily found herself on the hotel's terrace, needing air and silence. The November night was cold, but clear, the Chicago skyline glittering against the darkness. She pulled out her phone and opened her photos, a picture she'd taken just that morning. Her new apartment, modest but warm. A small bookshelf she'd assembled herself. On the top shelf sat a framed photograph of her mother, smiling in the summer sunshine of a life that felt both distant and immediate. "I did it, Mom," Emily whispered to the night. "I'm okay. Better than okay." The terrace door opened behind her. Michael stepped out, his coat draped over his arm. "Hiding from your admirers?" he asked with a gentle smile. "Just taking a moment." Emily turned to face him. "Thank you, Michael, for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing I could be more than my circumstances. You were always more, Emily. I just helped you remember." He moved to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the city lights. "You know what the best part of this year has been? Watching you discover your own strength. Realizing you didn't need me to save you. You needed someone to open a door so you could save yourself." They stood in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found unexpected connection across the canyon of their circumstances. A wealthy CEO who'd forgotten how to see beyond his walls. A homeless woman who'd refused to abandon her integrity even when it would have saved her. Both transformed by a single act of honesty in a garbage-strewn alley. "Oh, what's next for you?" Michael asked. Emily smiled, feeling the future open before her like sunrise. "Everything. The end." Did you like this story? Would you have done anything differently? Tell me in the comments. See you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe now to receive more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. Thank you very much.